Good evening to our viewers and those tuning in later. My name is Ajay Peets, and I am joined with Haley Tiart. Our special guest of the evening is the opposition leader and the One Bermuda Alliance Party leader, Jarion Richardson, JP, MP, and we will be discussing the reply to the throne speech and OBA's future plans. So now I'll take it over to my co-founder, Haley Tiart, with our first question.
Awesome. So I listened to the reply to the Thurn speech, that debate up in the House of Assembly. There was a lot of discussion about the role of opposition. So I just want to ask you and for our viewers to completely understand, what is the role of the opposition?
Sure, it's to scrutinize, it's to evaluate, it's to bring to people's attention, it's to hold the government accountable. It's quite actually a wide role. And when we say the role of the opposition, we're talking about the role of the opposition in Parliament. There is a wider role of accountability in Bermuda as well. So any person can act much like you guys are acting in a kind of semi-opposition role where people are being held accountable. So truth is being spoken in power, not just by us in the official capacity of the opposition of Bermuda, but anyone in a civil society can contribute to a national debate. So I just always want to make that clear that we are the opposition of Bermuda in Parliament, but that does not mean that nobody else is allowed to comment on politics or participate in it.
Is the role of the opposition limited to commenting, or is there also capabilities to introduce legislation and create change?
Absolutely. We have the Westminster system of Parliament, and there's a lot that can happen there. So not only can we ask certain questions, such as parliamentary questions, which, by the way, are falling a little bit up by the wayside, given that we now have public access to information requests and things like that. So you're not seeing as much a need. Before, it was only politicians or parliamentarians who could bring questions to government like that. But now with Patty, it's accessible to everyone. Not only that, but we can introduce legislation. We always have to be very mindful in Bermuda, though, that we have a lot of part-time politicians. And so the government has obviously a $1 billion civil service, which includes a number of parliamentary counsel to draft legislation and research and things like that. And the opposition, you very much have to do it basically by yourself. The House, the office of the legislature, which administers our legislature, our parliament, is very small and has a very, very tiny staff. So we don't have a lot of clerks, administrators, we don't have researchers, we don't have our own council in parliament. That all belongs to government. So a lot of times the vast majority of the activity you're going to see in House of Assembly and Senate, things like that, is coming from that very, very well-resourced government. And that's where you see the scrutiny, evaluation, accountability part come in for opposition.
Got you. And I asked that question just so you know, because I know in their Thurn speech, government said that they wanted to amend some legislation for governing Parliament, but they haven't said what they want to change. But in the same vein, OBA talked about improving transparency in government, and it sounds like there is some alignment there. And so my line of thinking is, how can opposition in its position proactively create some of that change that you guys are talking about in your reply to the Thurn speech?
Well, we bring it to people's attention all the time, especially the voters' attention, that the legislature in Bermuda is, in our opinion, not being given the proper resources to do their jobs. And when I say that, I do mean the office of the legislature. We need a lot. So, for example, there's various committees, and those committees have members of parliament, have senators. They need clerical support. They need research. They need draftsmen. Right now, the House of Assembly is still meeting in Veritas Place, which is the building just across from Dame Lewis Brown Evans Court Building, and not in Sessions House. Sessions House is a much bigger facility. It had a library, it had different offices and breakout rooms and meeting rooms. And really, to get the work done of Parliament, you need to have that kind of facility and support. And right now, because we're not doing that, that means that Parliament, the work of Parliament, is in fact infringed on a daily basis. And you got to remember that it's really Parliament, not government, that is the voice of people. And that's why we always want to be very clear that it's the government that answers to Parliament, not Parliament to government. And so when they talk about when the government talks about introducing good governance legislation, which, by the way, they already spoke about a number of times before, what we're bringing forward is that, listen, it's not just about that. It's really about providing the resources to the parts of our system so that they can bring about that natural oversight and that natural role. You don't really need to bring in. It's great to bring in new legislation, but what we really need is a very, very well-resourced parliament.
Right. So, in lieu of transparency and accountability and good social values, just last year, the OBA had a lot to say about the PLP's internal election. Now, the tables, at least on social media, have turned onto the OBA with no release of the numbers for your internal election results. So, in spirit of transparency, are you able to share those numbers with us?
Yeah, sure. I did catch wind of some of that on social media, and our folks who work more in that social media space did bring it to my attention. One of the reasons why I've been very clear that I don't want the numbers to be circulated is
Right.
really 5 points. It's first is that the rules for a general conference are made. The rules for an election at a general conference are decided on by the executive of the party ahead of time. Those rules actually require people to sit down. It's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of consensus building. It's written, it's agreed, and then all the candidates are then made aware of this is how this will take place, and here's all the things that are going to happen. You got to remember that for a person to not only be involved in politics is an act of courage, but then to stand in front of others who are volunteering. I mean, it's a lot to ask a person. So they really do have to have a lot of surety and certainty about what's going to happen and what it looks like. So the rules were established, they were made clear, and at no point during that conversation did we tell anyone or did we agree that we would circulate those individual, very specific numbers. The second point is that those numbers were in fact given out at the conference, and anyone can be a member of the OBA. Anyone could have walked in at that time. We have the forms right there. You can literally sign, and you can take a seat in the conference. And so that information has been handed out to everyone who was coming and going that night. And we had a really successful conference with a lot of people coming and going, a lot of new members. So I was very, very happy about that. It goes back also to my third point would be respecting candidates. As I said, it's a very brave thing for these guys to step forward into that role, and not all elections are favorable or give favorable results to all candidates, right? So if a candidate was not as successful as they would like to be, what we don't want to do is provide an opportunity for any kind of embarrassment or ridicule or anything like that. So we really do want to protect our candidates when they step forward to fulfill these roles. The fourth point is that where's the limit? Transparency. Well, let's put it this way: not all information is in fact public property. So a great example would be the names, addresses, phone numbers, and emails of attendees. Right? We're never going to we're not going to release that. That is a matter of privacy to those individuals. We have the Personal Information Protection Act that guarantees privacy, but in the United Kingdom, they have the same thing. In the US, they have the same thing. In Canada, that says that certain information is confidential and is kept by an organization, right? So when I say we're not releasing that, who dictates the release of what information? And this leads me to my final point, which is transparency. The purpose of transparency is accountability, not curiosity, right? And the fact is that we've introduced many levels of accountability, not just in setting up our rules of the election, but having a very clear process. It was very robust. There was a lot of monitoring going on. The accountability was definitely there. And so for those number of reasons, and especially relating to privacy, clarity of expectation with candidates, things like that, I decided that those numbers would not be released beyond what was already agreed before we went into the conference.
So the OBA has made the decision not to publicly release these numbers, but those numbers are available from all the people that attended the conference, and so they could possibly share that information.
I certainly don't control every member. I'm not sure I saw anyone writing anything down, to be fair. Because we had 4 candidates for deputy chairs, right? And 2 candidates for deputy leader. And everyone's kind of busy during a conference. So you get up and you're going to walk to the back of the room and you're going to vote, and then you're talking. Conferences are more than about elections. They're really an opportunity for members to engage with not just candidates, but members to engage with donors, or members to engage with each other, to engage with party officials. So there's a lot of moving pieces around. So what we're really paying attention to is the outcome of the election. And by the way, those candidates in that room are still working on their campaigns. They're still wandering around the room, shaking hands, getting to know people, explaining their positions. So it's not as if it's a very static and boring and formulaic process. It's very fluid. And so I didn't see anyone writing anything down. But again, I was also in the crowd walking around saying hi and doing things like that. But my point would be certainly those 5 points. But in 2024, anyone can come into that room just as in 2023. You can just walk in. We're an open party. But one thing we do have is I always want to be clear about expectations, protecting people's privacy and individual rights. A person, when they enter this world, they're not going to become a play toy or a public thing. They are a public figure and they have work to do and interests, but that does not mean, so for example, we don't speak to other politicians' family members, illnesses. That's all part of our code that we have to play by. And that doesn't mean that everyone's always going to agree with the decisions that I make as leader or the decisions that we make collectively, but we have to have a code and we have to stick by it. Accountability works always. It works all the time.
Yeah. You quite briefly mentioned individual rights, which connects to my next question that I want to ask. There's been no statement by government, PLP, OBA, or yourself on the ongoing genocide and human rights violations of Palestinians and the people in Congo and other human rights violations across the world. Why not?
Well, I mean, why not have a statement on Gaza? So when I was a police officer, I had occasion to visit a number of homes of families in distress. I'm not sure. I've said this in the house. One house was fairly disturbing, and one house was I saw a small child in a position of distress. You go to medical illnesses. In Bermuda, we have 600 last guess homeless. We have a tremendous amount of problems in Bermuda. And although I'm well aware of folks who want to give their charity to overseas, and obviously it's their resources, it's their efforts, they can do whatever they like. This is a free country. We have a lot of problems in Bermuda. And when I say that, I'm not understating that. I mean, we have a lot of problems. Our food lines now double and triple around buildings. We have problems, and I am focused, and the OBA is focused on the problems that we can fix. And the problems that we can fix in Bermuda are the problems that Bermudians are facing today. And as much as my heart goes out to so many conflicts, by the way, Gaza, Israel, tip of the spear for violence globally, right? I mean, the Rohingyas, I believe I said that right, I'm not sure. In Myanmar is another human tragedy of epic scales. Bangladesh right now in those refugee camps, they are extremely difficult, not just to manage the camps, but the human rights abuses that we're hearing about coming out of those camps, and then getting them back into Myanmar with a military government. I mean, that's a calamity that's been happening for the better part of 10 years that equally no one's talking about. Or how about the Ukraine war? and the travesties we're seeing along those river towns in the South. I mean, we're well aware of the human crimes against humanity that are taking place there. I mean, the world is a big place full of tragedy and violence. And my heart goes out to all of them. I've been very lucky that I've gotten to serve and help people in distress in their lives, in real distress. And I can tell you that, you know, it's a huge thing. And you just have to try as hard as you can at the thing you can do, right? It's just like when you see swimmers in distress, right? And we had to do the rescue swimming and all that kind of course in the police. And you jump in the water and there's 5 people. You can't save 5 people. So you got to save one. Then you come back and you do that again and again, and you try and you try and you try. But you work with what you have. And what we have in Bermuda is a lot of actual families in distress. So I'm very sorry about Gaza. I'm very sorry about Israel. I'm very sorry about Rohingyas. I'm very sorry about Ukraine. But I have families here that I have to save.
And I guess that's the statement right there.
Yeah, that is a statement. And I think that people don't understand the power of just a simple acknowledgement of humanity, and that's what you just did. And a lot of other leaders have been silent. So I do commend you for at least acknowledging and being and sympathizing with the people who are going through all of these different atrocities around the world. So our next question is that in the reply to the throne speech you read, we have to make sure that we modernize our political institutions and ensure that good governance laws hold us as politicians accountable. Those of us who share responsibilities or behave unethically or abuse our positions will have to go. So just last year, Marcus Jones had made some comments suggesting that young girls invite sexual abuse by posting inappropriate images on social media. He resigned, but then he was later announced as an OBA candidate. What does accountability look like in this instance if his resignation was accepted? Then what is different now?
Yeah, well, first of all, I welcome you to speak to Marcus directly, because I think that what Marcus had a very long, and this is what happens in the legislature. You start talking and you're talking for, let's say, 20 minutes, and you're developing ideas and you're trying to point out certain arguments, and you're really trying to work towards something that's quite complex, and you're trying to make a point. And then someone takes this little sliver, this little piece, and then expands it, explodes it, doubles down on it, and reinterprets it and spreads it around. And next thing you know, it takes on a whole new life of its own. And I can say hand on heart that anyone who's ever worked with Marcus Jones is well aware that his only interest is in protecting Bermuda and Bermudians. And he's called me out a number of times on, I might start talking about something, an issue, and he's going, where are you going with that? That doesn't change people's lives. It doesn't make people's lives better. Get off of that academic high horse. And he's done that for me. So when we talk about this statement, that it's this alleged intention that is being put into him, I think you should speak to Marcus Jones at length about that, because I think you'd be very surprised that it isn't that simple, and that there was an expedience. And Marcus' retirement was, that was him saying, I don't want to be a political football. I don't want to be a distraction, because every time that we talk about that comment and that inference and that allegation, and the more we talk about that, the less we're talking about how people in Bermuda have to pick between medication and groceries.
Well, I do want to just say that, like, with the recent statistics that came out, for example, that said like 90% of residents in Bermuda have experienced some sort of sexual assault or harassment. These are the things that are impacting Bermudians. And I feel like comments like these, even if they are just taken for what they are, just like a small snippet of a 20-minute long conversation, still have an impact on the ways that people are perceiving these issues, as well as the ideas related to how we approach solving them. So
I can definitely speak. In the police service, I had occasion to work in units where we responded to sexual assault. And I remember getting called. It was a winter night, not too different from tonight. Quite cold. Well, it was colder. It was down this dark road, and I was in uniform patrol at the time, and you get there, the sirens are all going, and this lady's hurt, and she's in the street, and I can definitely say that you see things like that, and you realize just how bad this world can be sometimes, and then you go through the process, the kits and the evidence gathering, and the whole time there's someone really hurting at the center of this. I did that more than once. I will do that every time it's called for. This party does not take these things lightly, and we will always be there to stop this from happening and to defend those it happens to. I'm sorry that Marcus's words were, again, I invite you to speak to him. He's a mature man who has raised a good family. He's taken care of his daughters. He's been a contributor to our society. He's, I don't know how old, over 50. And I think to boil him down to this one thing is an oversimplification of a person who's committed his life to service. And I can assure you that I am not alone in having been front and center of these things that happen. Another person who's joined us is Carl Niblett, a retired detective constable under Western CID, and he can speak to that as well. Again, I don't think I'm going to sit here and satisfy you on that point. The only thing I can say is I invite you to actually speak to Marcus, and don't maintain a distance between that allegation and the person who it's been made about.
Definitely. Well, I want to move a little bit into more so politics. We're already talking about that, but we interviewed Ben Smith before the constituency for by-election, and we asked about addressing the history of the OBA and the legacies of the UBP. He told us that it would be best to let the former members of the UBP that are current members of the OBA to address this. What actions can we expect to see from the OBA to address the relationship with the UBP?
The relationship with the UBP?
Yes.
What relationship? You mean that some UBP members left the UBP and joined with the BDA to form the One Bermuda Alliance?
Mm-hmm. So yes, the legacies of that, the idea that the OBA, in both the minds of older generations and younger generations, have this tether to the UBP. And then also, I went through some of her Twitter comments, and she shared, I don't know if she shared or if someone else shared, that the same funding sources that were for the UBP are the same groups of people for the OBA. So there is some historical connection and funding connection. And so recognizing this, when can we expect to see the OBA really address it?
I think the connection is something of political expedience, to be fair. In the first instance, funding sources is interesting. First of all, the island's only so big, so so there's bound to be overlap in funding sources, and especially since a lot of people want to maintain political neutrality, they typically then fund both parties. So the same, if a funding source conversation was had, I would say I would argue that the PLP probably have far more UBP funding sources than the OBA does. But statistically, that's not the kind of evidence we would have statistically available, because one thing that we don't have is the records of the United Bermuda Party, because we're not the United Bermuda Party, so we never owned those records, and I couldn't even tell you where they were, whatever happened to them since the party wrapped up. I can tell you the people who do know the answers to that is actually sitting on the PLP side. Kim Swan and Wayne Ferbert were both former leaders of the United Bermuda Party, so they could tell you far more than I could. Ben and myself have never been in the United Bermuda Party, and though we've worked with people who have left it to come form the One Bermuda Alliance, I would mirror Ben's comment on that and say, well, you could ask them what some of the similarities are between the parties. But I want to be absolutely clear that they left that party to form a new party. So I'm not sure what. Now, with that being said, I do have to admit that I'm often interested in the connection, or rather on the necessity for making a connection between the party that I joined, the One Bermuda Alliance, and the party that I grew up under, the United Bermuda Party.
Yeah.
It's something that I'm always curious about, because, yeah, we have former members of the United Bermuda Party in the OBA, and we have former members of the United Bermuda Party in the PLP. But I never connected. I never said the PLP is a version of the UBP, because some members of the UBP are now in the PLP. I didn't make that connection, but clearly people have done it for us. So it is a conversation I'd like to hear. So when you speak to more people about it, speak to Sir John. He'd definitely be able to speak to how, if there's the degree of the similarities between the two. But for me and mine, so to speak, I was never a member of the UBP. I don't know. I was a kid, and then I was a young adult for a little bit, but I never joined it, went to their functions, and I certainly don't have access to their records or finances to know about that statistical or funding overlap.
So in 2020, the OBA was only able to elect 6 people, a 50% decline from the previous election where 12 OBA candidates were elected. As the party leader, how do you plan to engage the voting population, especially the youth?
Well, by things like this, but what you'll find is that how we plan to engage people is by going to where people are having those conversations. And what you'll see is that we're a lot more visible. Now, we're a lot more visible because what we're doing is we've decentralized or taken away the need for top down, right? We're a flat structure now. We went in after 2020, we went into a period of reform, and we came out with a much more flattened structure. So people are empowered to go out on their own and go make those connections. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to show up in the paper every day. What that means is that they're going to go out to people's houses. They're going to go out to sports clubs. They're going to go out to fireside chats, pop-ups, blitzes. You name the event. C25, that team had a seniors tea. And the Pembroke team went and had KBB, had a cleanup. How we're going to engage is by doing this one-on-one, face-to-face, person-to-person. That's how we're going to engage. So that means that, and I'm looking forward to this weekend. We have 2 events going on, and then I think it's 2 canvassing teams out, but I'm not sure. It could be 3. I definitely know of 2 canvassing teams going out, and again, what we're doing is we're giving candidates the freedom to become representatives of a constituency. One of the problems with party politics in Bermuda is that people, what we don't want to happen is we don't want to have candidates who become representatives and then join, for example, the backbench, and then for whatever reason have to parrot a party position. We want them to actually be engaging with the voters and constituents and residents in that area, and to represent them and their views. that's one of the things that we have to do differently in politics in Bermuda, and that's what we're bringing to the table for the One Bermuda Alliance. Is, when you have a big tent party, you got to have all the voices in there, and so that's the, when I say strategy, it comes across as being kind of formulaic and static, and it's a fancy word. I think that in Bermuda, with a voting population of 45,000, where most people know each other, families all know each other, that what this really boils down to is person to person. It boils down to relationships.
Right. And when I say this, I'm not blaming the OBA. I think this is the fault of Bermuda's greater political structure. But I personally feel as though, especially as a young voter, that a lot of our political leaders haven't really sought me out or sought my peers out, because it is important for politicians to meet where the voters are. But I don't think you've really hit the mark on really engaging with young people. Have you explored the use of social media in a more intentional way?
Yeah, no, yes, I agree. One of the things you started with, and I want to touch on, is that even though we have a Westminster system, it's actually quite an old version. I mean, if you were to do computer versions, Westminster's on, version 250, and we're on, 190, version 190. So that's why I always say, look, we have a system, and yes, it is Westminster, but I wouldn't throw it out the window. It's actually just quite an old version of it. Now, so with that being said, exploring social media. So one of the things we had to do first was make sure that we who were volunteering to step into the fold and to fight and save Bermuda from what we see as societal and economic decline, we had to make sure that we were on the same page first, because what we don't want to be is inauthentic. You can have a communication strategy, and it can be fancy, and you can pay all the money, and you can, it's got all the bells and whistles. But if at the core of it, it's inauthentic, and the people who are if the people at the middle of it aren't being true to some values, then what it is, it becomes almost like a charade, like a masquerade, a game. And that's what we see too much in politics. So we had to make sure that that was solid first. So now you see our communication strategy rolling out, and that's why you're seeing far more engagement. As it relates to the use of social media, it's one of the many ways that we can engage with folks. And it's one of the ways we have to develop. One of the things we have to be careful about in Bermuda politics, just like all politics, is that all things, first of all, cost money, right? And secondly, now luckily the boosts and things like that, as we work through the economics, we're like, okay, we can see how we can do this, and we're getting better at it. But secondly, you can do those things wrong. And that's one thing that I want to be very, very clear about, is when we post and when we communicate on social media, I don't want to be posting, there's formats that we're working with. Twitter, I want to say, is 240 characters. Is that right?
I believe so. It is limited.
It's a very small bit of information, and sometimes the things that we're working with are actually quite long. And so we want to make sure that we're giving out messages in the correct size, format, synopsis, so that it comes out. But sometimes it's just a longer message, and then we think, well, you know what, maybe that's better done as an article, or maybe that's better done as a video. So for example, at the conference, we showed 2 of the videos that we've been working on, and now we're developing a whole slew of short form videos for YouTube, which I think is part of the social media ecosystem. So we recognize it's an invaluable tool. We recognize that a lot of people use it to communicate. A lot of people use it not just to communicate, to engage with each other and exchange ideas and to develop ideas. And it's a space we're going to move in. And I just make sure that, look, we have to do that right. I don't want us all running around making a mess of things. We have to make sure that when we're engaging first from a point of authenticity, second from a point of thoughtfulness, and third, for a point of actual effectiveness, that we're actually saying what we mean, because it's very easy to say something very wrong.
Right. I mean, there are definitely other simple ways to connect with people on social media. I do understand the concern for ensuring that the message comes out the right way. It could even just be used as a communication tool. It's so accessible. It would be nice to see the ability to
Yeah.
connect with our party leaders or political leaders on social media in a way that is a little bit more direct than going through other channels that would naturally prevent us having these necessary conversations.
Hmm.
Um, but it is food for thought, and I think we'll definitely see this culture shift in the next few years once the younger generation gets a little bit more in tuned in the political scene as well. Um,
Mm. And
but yes,
oh, sorry.
sorry,
I do want to.
continue.
I just wanted to add that the younger generation joining the OBA, by the way, is what's really helping us in this space because
Right.
you don't know what you don't know, right? And so when I sit down and Dwayne explains something to me, Dwayne Robinson, who by the way is an example of that a young person can do great things in the One Bermuda Alliance, right? He's been a member of our executive. He worked on our communications, our platform. He's now second time a senator. So youth isn't some sort of like it's not some sort of plan that we drafted and we put on a shelf and then we said, okay, the youth go into that other room and talk amongst yourselves and then come out and give us political points. That's not at all what happened, right? We said, no, just come in as one of us, right? Sit down at the table just like everybody else. And someone like a Dwayne, a Sophia, and a Keisha, they're what they bring to the table is so helpful. Because at the end of the day, the Bermuda that we're trying to build is the Bermuda of the future, not the Bermuda of today. The Bermuda of today is already built; it already exists, right? The Bermuda of the future is what we're trying to generate. And so I couldn't agree more. It's an area that we're going to develop. We're going to get better and better at it. And one thing, but I would definitely encourage any person who says they're in that youth bucket, join the party. Join the party. Come to caucus. Sit down and tell us, because when you run, we are one of two political parties in Bermuda, and like it or lump it, it's those two that are the actors in this space. And until someone forms another one, it's these two who are having that conversation. And so we welcome anybody to join and sit down and have a conversation with us, because we're not here for us. We're not here for just us. We're here for every single person, and that includes the sons and daughters of the PLP and the cousins and nephews and grandchildren. We do really mean that. We do mean that we're here for everyone.
Yeah. Well, on the same line of youth, I went through the reply, and young people were directly mentioned twice in the response. Once in the Imagine a Bermuda section, where it says Imagine a Bermuda where young people look forward to accessible home ownership, decent standard of living, and affordable healthcare. And then on the second one was on page 6 when discussing the proposed uniform services cadet program. That just talked about how more attention on uniform services is a strong way to not only streamline the entrance of young people into those careers, but provide needed early life lessons. I say all this to say that your own members, specifically Sophia, critiqued the throne speech for a lack of inclusion of young people. But in this reply, in my opinion, young people are still missing. And so how does the OBA plan to address the problems concerning young people?
Well, I mean, we didn't mention. Well, I have to be a bit careful here because you only have so much material that you can, or rather, you only have so long, and then you only really want to talk about so much. There's a lot to talk about in Bermuda, right? Even though we're only 21 square miles, 60,000 people, 500 miles away from the nearest landmass, you can talk about anything, really. I mean, the bridge leading to the airport's about to fall down. Well, hold on, sorry. That is a very old bridge, and I want it replaced. That didn't make it in, right? There's a lot of things I want to be in there, but you always have to be careful with how much you put in. I don't think we're in any way neglecting the youth or in any way disadvantaging. We're what we're doing is we're taking the youth so seriously that the youth are in fact already in the room, sitting at the table, and like this isn't, again, you always think of those family gatherings like that Christmas dinner where there's an adult table and a kids table. Yeah, that does not exist in the One Bermuda Alliance. There's one table and we all sit at it. And that means the seniors sit at the table, and every interest group in Bermuda does that. So we mention the youth. So for example, we talk about in the throne speech, home ownership, but there's another part that it doesn't say youth directly, but it definitely is intended for the youth. And we're talking about a Bermuda where people aren't able to be born, educated, raise a family, have a career, have a home, invest, retire, and pass away all in Bermuda, right? That's what we're saying. We made a point of that in the reply to the throne speech, that Bermuda isn't like that anymore. It used to be like that. Well, that's a great point. Now, it doesn't say youth in it, but that's who we're talking about, because for a lot of people, especially the seniors, it's already happened, right? Mm-hmm. All of these things we're talking about, that's in the past for them. So I would be very cautious in this space. What we're trying to do is we're not going to put a word in because it's politically appetizing, right? We're going to actually work towards solutions, and those solutions inevitably include the youth. Home ownership being a key point, but also that statement about basically how, there are youth in Bermuda who are not going to have opportunities to travel overseas. They're not going to have opportunities for overseas education, et cetera, like that. And how could they possibly be so disadvantaged? What's become of our country when a person who doesn't have that opportunity is so significantly disadvantaged that now it becomes almost impossible to live in the country and they have to flee to the United Kingdom? So it's baked into the cake. And in fact, maybe that's the example I can use. Once you bake the cake, you can't take the salt and the eggs and the flour out of it anymore, but it's still in the cake.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So in your interview with the Royal Gazette, when asked about the OBA platform, you said that a platform exists but has not been released. And typically these statements are released during the election time. For instance, in 2020, the OBA released their platform 7 days before the election. So for those who want to understand who the OBA is and what you stand for and your detailed policy plans, will we have to wait until 2024, 2025 to see that?
Yeah, so a lot of the ideas are included, and you said you did the breakdown to the reply to the throne speech, and so what we did there was it was the first time that we introduced this new method of thinking about policies in Bermuda. So typically in Bermuda, right, everything is outlined by ministry. So there's environment, and then there's 1, 2, 3 ideas for environment, and then there's national security and 1, 2, 3 ideas about national security. Well, what we did when we sat down in these platform and working groups, and we said, look, that's actually not right. Bermuda's far more interconnected than that. You can't just silo these problems. So what we did is we picked 5 key themes, and you saw some of that in the reply to the throne speech. I boiled it down to 3. And so there's these 3 big themes for how do we fix Bermuda. And one was taking it back to basics. The next was making life easy. And the next was making sure something doesn't appear. So that's how we bucketed those ideas. Those ideas are from the platform, though, right? So it's not as if it's not there. It's just there in a format that doesn't read as it normally did, or has in the past. Equally, but probably the most important part is the road shows. This is the part that is key to developing and contributing to this platform. It is not our intention to tell Bermuda what to do. That is not what's going to happen on a going forward basis. We have ideas. And by the way, when we developed these ideas, we did speak to a lot of experts. We had panels that came into the room. and we had 2 or 3 people sitting there and explaining that environment to us, what's contributing to circumstances. It was actually very, very engaging exercise. And then we came out and said, hey, look, here's some ideas. Here's the things we can tackle. Here's the things we got to do. But what we don't want to do is then just turn around and say, we don't want to turn around and then implement or think we're going to implement all these things when, first of all, we are not convinced that all of the facts that are relevant to running Bermuda are in fact known by us or the public. We do not believe that to be the case. So, and the reason that we're very cautious in that space is because the last time the OBA took over the government, we discovered that we couldn't make payroll. Now, for 5,000 workers with 5,000 families, with 5,000 pensions and healthcare and things like that, that's not an administrative oops. That is a huge, huge risk to the safety and security of Bermuda. So the thing that we want to do first is actually go through everything top to bottom and make sure that we understand the disposition of our finances and what we can and cannot do. That's why we're going, hey, listen, we're not going to come rolling out of the gates with we're going to build new docks in 6 months, because we genuinely don't know what's in the kitty to enable a lot of these ideas. So that's why we're not doing that part. But the road shows is going to enable us to say, you heard the reply to the throne speech. Here's that idea. Now, here's some more about it, but you tell us what you think about it. And, we're going to do parking lots. I'm not sure if you've been to a lot of those sort of facilitative workshops, but parking lots of those huge whiteboards and flip charts and things like that to get feedback. It's one of the reasons actually the conference was so successful, was another opportunity to put forward a couple ideas, to get some feedback and to go, okay, yes, this is a good idea. Or, if someone comes along and goes, when we did the workshop for farmers, I can tell you, I sat there the whole time. I couldn't even speak. I learned so much about farming in Bermuda. And that meant that when we came out of that, we have some ideas, but we need to speak to farmers. We need to let them be the ones to tell us what to do. We can't, here I am. I'm a regulatory compliance consultant. What do I know about seed banks? I should not be the one to tell you about seed banks. Okay, so that's why we're being very deliberate, and we're being very reflective, and we're engaging everyone in the development of the platform. And it's not just here's a PDF, 20 pages, do it. That's not going to happen anymore in Bermuda.
So you're still in the process of developing the platform?
No. The big framework is done. Now we're working on the little pieces that come under each one of those silos, and that's why it's. So, for example, obviously, standard of living is a huge framework, and standard of living means accessibility to affordable homes, and those pieces are there. What we want to make sure is that when we say, so for example, housing's a fantastic idea, because in housing, it's not a question of a static single unit available. The question is the ability of a person to move through levels of housing, right? So if a person is on, for example, assisted living, they don't want to be there, right? And we don't want them to be there their entire life. So how do we transition them into all the way through those levels into home ownership? Because in home ownership, you can actually build, I wouldn't say build wealth, but you see what I'm saying? You can get financial security, especially given our aging population. We need persons to hold those kinds of assets so that they can be secure in their future, right? So the question of housing isn't, we built a house. That's the beginning level of that question in Bermuda. So that's why I'm saying, look, this is a deeper conversation. So yeah, we can say that, and yeah, it's in there, and yeah, everyone's going to say that, but that's not actually the total answer to the question. The total answer is far more complex and requires far more people to be involved.
Gotcha. Well, we are close to our wrap up. We've definitely gone over 30 minutes, but I just have one more question to ask related to this whole idea of listening to Bermudians, getting their insight. In the last election, there was overwhelming support from a lot of community groups for a debate with the party leaders ahead of the general election. Can we expect the OBA to commit to, or you individually, to commit to participating in a debate? Is this something that OBA would consider possibly legislating or including in an election platform?
I don't know. I'll give it some thought. One thing I'm a little cautious about is Americanizing our politics even more. That's its own world. It's got its own culture. It's got its own everything. And we're seeing a little bit of that getting into the United Kingdom as well. I'll give it some thought. But one of the things I'm very cautious about in politics is comparing. A lot of times in politics, we think we're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges. And in fact, when you dig into the detail of a policy, you dig into the detail of a party, you're actually comparing very, very different things. It's not apples to apples. It's more like apples to fish. And let me unpack that. Things that are different should not be simplified to make it easier to talk about. If they're that different, then they're that different, right? And so a great example would be, let's say, let's talk about, political language, so the way that politicians engage with each other and the public, but really with each other, is a great example. And what you'll observe is that some of our politicians are very considered and very deliberate and very civil, and really are working together to have a debate about to get to the best answer for Bermudians. And some are just throwing mud. They're just being derogatory. And one day, this is one of the things I actually put in the reply to the throne speech. Our proceedings aren't televised, right? So you don't get to see it. And because actually, when we're debating, the microphone has to be switched on for you to hear what we're saying at each other. But, that microphone doesn't have to be on. And people will things that would shock you are said sometimes.
We hear them. You can hear, you can't hear, have the mic on. We hear all the back comments and everything. Definitely.
Yeah. And listen, it's Westminster. There's a degree of heckling, but when it gets to when it comes down to levels of character, and the speaker's, he's working hard, but he's listening to a debate. He's got the mics are on and there are people speaking. He can't just sit there and just hear every word in the back. So when I say that there's a difference, that's why I encourage people to listen to the House of Assembly, because I go, or even better, attend. That's the best way, because then you can see it. And so when we have politicians who are so derogatory toward one another, towards one another's character, towards one another's families, that's what I mean to say. Like, look, you can't. These are just different, and I would welcome the public to observe the manner in which politicians we conduct ourselves, and then reach a conclusion about us individually.
And what exactly is the difference between the House of Assembly being streamed over radio, or the audio being streamed, and a debate in a similar manner being streamed, but just specifically for the general election?
I'm sorry, say that again. I might have missed that.
I'm asking for the difference because, like you mentioned, it sounds like your reasoning behind not wanting or considering, like being in the space of considering a debate around the election would be because the politicians will use derogatory terms, attack personal family members, like those things that also occur in the House of Assembly that's also publicly available for people to listen to. So I'm just trying to understand the difference between that.
Yeah. I think I was trying taking this super long road to say is that sometimes sometimes a debate isn't needed because they've already conducted themselves in such a manner that you actually have seen everything. And FYI, it's not as if the House doesn't meets infrequently, right? I mean, it meets multiple times a year. There's plenty of debates on plenty of topics. So that's why I'm just going. I'm not going to commit to it. I'll think about it. Thank you for introducing it. But it's already there. And granted, it'd take a bit of homework, but that's already there. And what I don't want to do is introduce is start doing things just because somebody else does them. And so that's why I'll take it under consideration. And by the way, when I say that, that's not a flippant statement. That everyone is well aware that that when we say these things, we have to sit down and think about them and have a conversation about them. And then we'll make, and the same way, you know, sometimes I have to make a decision that is, you know, no one's gonna give me a party to make those decisions, but you know, there's certain principles that we have to stick by, and one of them is that the buck stops with me, and you know, I'll make that decision at that time.
Sounds great.
Well, just for your consideration, if you would like to kind of dive deep into it, that precedent has already been set, though it wasn't the traditional structure of a debate. We held the pre-election leaders forum in the 2020 election, and we had each of the three party leaders for the three parties at the time. And I think at the end of the day, I think it was of great benefit and service to the whole island of Bermuda, and it gave really good insight into each party, their platform, and also each leader, because we don't tend to see our leaders in that way. And it was just very refreshing. But just a little plug for you and our viewers. It is on our YouTube channel, I believe, the pre-election forum from 2020.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's like I said, when I was after the 2020 election, there was this conversation about starting a new party and things like that, or even your question relating to the UBP. I often I have to chuckle because we are a new party, right? I mean, first of all, the OBA in its entirety is only 11 years old, so it is not, you know, it's not. We're not having 60-year galas. That's not a thing. But equally, after the 2020 election, you see a lot of new faces in the party, and that means that, yeah, we did do a lot of reform, and there was a lot of sitting around and working on new things. So sometimes, you know, that question about what's the, you know, UBP, I'm like, I've never even opened a file that said UBP on it, so I have no idea what the connection is back there. We are a new party. We're doing new things, and we are going to take the government and we're going to fix things. That's where we're at.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to seeing all the work that you have in store, as well as the overall OBA party. Thank you so much for your time. But before I continue my closure, Haley, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Nope, you can go ahead and close out.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jarion. It was quite refreshing to get to know you. And thank you for considering Bermuda Youth Connect for this opportunity. And we look forward to our...
Oh, no, I think she out. But thank you all for watching and staying on with us, even though it has been a while. And I hope you all have a good evening.